citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast. Each week we have exciting guests talking not primarily about all the problems in the world, and boy, there are so many overwhelming problems in the world. But here we want to move from those problems to solutions. We're looking for solutionaries, people who have a key for how we can get out of the mess we're in and how we can build a much more positive world. Now, this podcast comes at a time when we're facing a momentous election, and when, of course, many people want to move even beyond that toward more empowering ways that people can make a difference on the planet. But we have an important consideration right now, which is the continued survival of the human race on Earth. And to join us in talking about this crucial issue of global security, the security of our very planet, we have an amazing guest, Jonathan Granoff. Now, Jonathan Granoff, he's the president of the Global Security Institute. They work with so many key Nobel Prize winners, with Mikhail Gorbachev, with top names in the field of how do we come together as a planet. He also chairs the Nuclear Nonproliferation Task Force of the American Bar, the Nuclear Nonproliferation segment of the American Bar Association. He works with Parliamentarians for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Disarmament, with the Jane Goodall Institute, with the Parliament of World Religions, and he works so closely with the United Nations and others. So welcome, Jonathan. And maybe for starters, you can tell us a little bit about what led you to start the Global Security Institute and what is its mission?
Well, I didn't start the Global Security Institute. Senator Alan Cranston did.
Okay.
And it was his it began with his meeting with Albert Einstein in the early 1950s, in which he was educated on what nuclear weapons could likely do. And he was seized by that issue for his entire political career. And in the 1990s, there was an organization called the State of the World Forum, which after the Cold War brought together world leaders in all sorts of disciplines. It was, poetry, physics, finance, politics, military. And I was invited to that. It's interesting. I was invited by Sam Keane, who was doing a session on spirituality for the 21st century. And as I was about to join this panel, Sam said, Jonathan, the BBC is going to broadcast it live. And the panelists are Marianne Williamson, Wayne Dwyer, Deepak Chopra, all these famous spiritual people. And they don't know you. And they don't want you on the program. And I'm no longer the moderator. I'll be a speaker. So, sorry. So I'm standing there. I'd come all prepared to be contribute to this discussion. And Senator Cranston tapped me on the shoulder and said, aren't you coming to lunch with us? And I said, oh, yes, of course. So we got in an elevator and we went to the penthouse of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. And it opened up and Alan said, this is where the UN Charter was first signed. This is where the UN Charter was negotiated, right in this room. And I got goosebumps, literally. We sat down for lunch and there was Mikhail Gorbachev, Lee Butler, who had been head of the strategic command of all the targeting and readiness of the U.S. arsenal, Richard Butler, who was head of the UN Special Commission on Iraq, and George Bunn, whom I knew very well, who was one of the drafters of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. And at that meeting, we discussed the need to have a serious organization and focus specifically on the rule of law and the elimination of nuclear weapons. And that's really where it started, in that discussion. And it really boiled down to the insight that if we get every issue right, every other issue right, and don't get this one right, it won't matter. We get this issue wrong, humanity will destroy itself by accident, design, or madness.
Yeah, that's what President Kennedy said, and his famous address. He said, he said, humanity stands under a sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident, by miscalculation or madness. The weapons of war must be abolished, or they'll abolish us. Well, in the time since Kennedy said that, what progress do you see that we've made in turning around the threat of nuclear war, and are we teetering back to the brink?
That's a large question. It's hard to say progress because you don't have anything to measure it against. But one of the things that came out of that insight was the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. And that arose from the realization in the Cuban Missile Crisis of how close we came to ending humanity. The weapons actually were fully operational in Cuba. There were dozens of fully operational nuclear weapons. And had the Joint Chiefs of Staff had their way and invaded, they would have been used and we wouldn't be here today. So after that crisis, the KGB and the CIA looked very seriously at the issue of the proliferation of these weapons and concluded that absent the creation of a constraint, a legal constraint, that there would be dozens of nuclear weapon states. So they negotiated a treaty to stop the proliferation of the weapons, that countries that would promise not to have nuclear weapons would get promised the benefit of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and the countries that had tested nuclear weapons prior to January of 1967, the P5, China, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, and then the Soviet Union, and now Russia, that they promised that they would negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. That treaty went into effect in 1970 under Richard Nixon's presidency. And that treaty has been very effective. Instead of having dozens of nuclear weapon states, we only have 9. We have those 5 and then 4 countries outside of the treaty. And no other countries are outside of the treaty, which are Pakistan, India, North Korea, and Israel. So we have a universal treaty of non-proliferation with a promise to, by the 5 nuclear weapon states, to negotiate elimination. It's now on the people to push our governments to live up to the legal duties that they presently have. And I don't know, you say, where are we today? It's possible that the COVID crisis has raised the public consciousness of the fact that the huge military expenditures that we engage in cannot protect us from the actual threats that threaten us. In fact, nuclear weapons are a strange paradox. The more we perfect the weapon, the less security we obtain. And so the nations with weapons are expending enormous amounts of money. The US has pledged in excess of $1 trillion with no public debate to modernize the arsenal, starting a new global arms race. But the people of the world don't really want to blow each other up, and they don't have confidence in it. And I think the virus may awaken a greater sense of what real security is. What real security is health, safety in our neighborhoods, schools, employment, a clean, sustainable environment. And I think that's the direction of the conscience of humanity more than ever before.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned the clean environment, which of course, and what you're saying is absolutely true. The entire world wants to be, almost anybody you talk to, and even the people who are in the midst of this say, well, we don't really, we say there shouldn't be nuclear weapons, but because of this and this, we have to have them temporarily. But nobody wants these things, and yet they're on us. And now you're mentioning also the environment. I understand from our recent discussion that you had a very personal, visceral experience of experiencing the ecocide that we're doing with our planet in Greenland. Can you tell us a moment about that?
Well, yeah, it started with just like Senator Cranston, an elder visionary named Johannes Witteveen. Johannes Witteveen was one of the founders of the International Monetary Fund and was the Minister of the Exchequer, the Minister of the Treasury of the Netherlands, instrumental in creating the financial system of success of the European Union. And he was a Sufi. And in his 90s, he lost his wife of 65 years. And then his son, who was a member of the parliament, was in the Malaysian airliner shot down over the Ukraine. And he was in his 90s when this happened. And he decided, I don't have any reason to be here unless I do the best thing I possibly can. So he brought together a bunch of thought and spiritually inspired leaders in Turkey. And we decided that the best thing we could do is advance the Peace Pledge. So we started the Peace Pledge Project, which I commend to everyone's attention. It's the people-powered planet. This was the Peace Pledge Project. And It's basically a pledge to put loving kindness and compassion above any differences of ideology, dogma, beliefs, national, racial, gender identity, that the purpose and intention of our lives is fulfilled only in the context of advancing loving kindness and compassion. So that was the idea. So it took on life, and we had a series of pilgrimages to holy places. And one of the participants was an Eskimo elder, a Gungagak, uncle, they call him. And for indigenous people, the natural world is part of the sacred body. For me, God's formless, mysterious, boundless, infinite. Creation is a book to learn from, a sacred scripture indeed, but not, I don't see it the same way as an indigenous consciousness seems to. But this was an interfaith initiative, and thus it was imperative that we honored his faith tradition, his temple, his sacred framework, which is the natural world. So we had an expedition up to Greenland. No running water, no toilets, no electricity, light 24 hours a day. But at night, very cold. It was a challenge. We went and saw the melting of the polar ice cap. Now, I'd read about it, and I've been, an educated person, but I had no concept of the magnitude until I saw hunks of ice the size of apartment buildings breaking away from the ice cap and crashing into rivers with billions, tens of billions of gallons of pure fresh water that has been captured in the ice cap for time immemorial, pouring into our oceans. I saw where the ice cap had been 3 miles high, it was only 100 yards. But this was the really most powerful part of the experience for me. There was this one field that he took us to, as far as the eye could see, literally as far as the eye could see, that had been under the ice had melted. Now, I had seen fields of boulders in Pennsylvania that had come down from the Ice Age, big, huge granite boulders. They're near Strasburg, Pennsylvania. But all the boulders are the same kind of rock. But underneath the polar ice cap, all of the stones were different. And they had formations in them, geometric formations in them, spirals, lines, different colors, different layers. It was as if each stone, whether it was the size of a boulder or tiny, was a gem. They were beautiful. So I took a bunch of them, put them in my pocket, got in the rover, and we're going back to base camp. And my conscience kicked in. Oh my God. I felt I had stolen jewelry from Tiffany's. Worse, I felt I was robbing something sacred. Worse, I felt I was violating nature. I can't tell you, it was like my conscience kicked in. I said, stop the man. And I jumped out, ran a few hundred yards, and put each one back. Because I experienced that indigenous connectivity to the natural world, that it's a gift of wondrous beauty and sacred. And that was the lesson. That was the first part of the lesson. The next part was we went from Greenland to Assisi and had a huge interfaith service at the shrine of St. Francis. And the message that we carried was, of course, we have to learn the wisdom of St. Francis, which is, today we have the technology to melt the polar ice cap. We have to develop the technology to melt the ice in the heart. And that was very powerful. We got lots of coverage in the press around the world, enormous. Nothing in the United States.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's one of the problems, of course, in the United States with news sources, where so many people don't realize that we're teetering on the brink of extinction, and that at least this election may be a chance to step back a little bit from the brink until we begin to build some alternatives where we can really create a secure planet. But it is very essential, I think, that everyone go out and vote, even if you hate politics, and even if you really rather have a third-party candidate, we've got to at least hold off extinction by voting in this election. But then the key thing is to how to build. There are people all over the world who have that rising of the heart, that connection with humanity, with people all over, and yet we see these broken political systems. One of the things that attracted me to Gary's story, and that he talks right in his book about his love of the earth. He has another book called Dear World. I know you recently watched Gary's movie. What about Gary's story attracted you?
Well, his courage and his conviction and his ability to empower other people in the hundreds of thousands to step out and express their natural aspiration for human unity. If you took a bunch of children, 3 to 5 years old, different races, ethnic groups, and you put them together with young animals, except predatory ones, goats, cows, deer, etc., dogs, cats, etc. They'd all jump together and play. We don't come here with these identities. In fact, we come here, you look at little children, we come here with a desire to play, to communicate, to learn. That's what our natural state is. And then we have grafted onto us a set of these other identities. Well, the modern state was created to end the carnage in the 17th century in Europe over whose definition of Jesus' love was better. Right? It was Protestants and Catholics slaughtering each other. In some parts of Europe, a third of the population was decimated. So in 1648, a bunch of lawyers and wonks got together. People don't know, how did the state get created? Created the modern state as an antidote to this slaughter. The state itself can become an idol and be a barrier to the peace of human unity. Gary, from his conscience and from his perception of the nationalistic dynamic that helped create World War II, said, let's step beyond this and look at the globe as a whole, and let's start with the premise of the unity of the human family. It didn't begin with a political analysis so much as an analysis of values of his heart. And then he stepped into it. And he went all in, and he didn't look back. And, and I think that kind of commitment to the highest calling of conscience is contagious. Right. Because once you see one person doing it, you have to think, well, I could do this a little bit, and once you start doing that a little bit, it's so fulfilling. Goethe talked about how once you make that commitment to something, all of these forces that you can't see with your eyes or hear with your ears fill your heart, and you start to see that there is a moral arc to creation, and that there are forces that bless us. There, some in different systems they call these forces angels or or whatever, what spirits, let's not give them names. Let's not call them things. Let's experiment. Let's experiment. Like Gary took the golden rule global.
Right.
Treat your neighbor as yourself. He took that as the neighborhood, as the whole planet, right?
Right. And he, in a way, launched a very grand experiment, which is so many people, so many great wisdom teachers have talked about love, connection, how we're all one, and yet Gary was kind of the first person to really live it. I mean, Gary quotes the Declaration of Independence, saying that it is the right of the people to institute new government. Now, you're an international lawyer. How is law created? How are governments created? I mean, Gary had the audacity, after connecting with this guru, to actually go out and he almost laughs at himself for doing it, declaring a government of, by, and for the people. And yet he said, well, who are they talking about? Old guys in gray wigs? Or is it you and I? Do we have a right to create a system of global law for our planet that can save us from these suicidal threats?
Well, of course we have a human right to, we do create government. It's not a matter of speculation. We do create government. Government's created by the consent of those who are governed. And if the people don't consent to it, they rebel. That's a fact of life. I mean, we do create government. Government doesn't, before the modern state, the model of government was God gives authority to the king, and the king could be both the spiritual authority and the political authority. But in Europe, it was the concept that God gives authority to the royal families to govern and gives authority to the church to govern the spiritual well-being of the community. But it was a hierarchical model in which the authority of government comes from a metaphysical belief in a God of authority. And then that God of authority has agents, whether it's the king, and then the king has a vassal, and the king has a prince, etc., who are agents of God. And thus, when people rebelled against monarchy, monarchs always said, well, our authority comes from God. You're not fighting with me, you're fighting with God. That's very bad. Very, very bad. And of course, they had the church backing up this idea. The Holy Roman Empire was based on this. So the vision of the United States was no. I mean, Tom Paine's famous book, Common Sense. The vision was no, all human beings are equal. The king doesn't have any more authority. The legitimacy of government comes from those who are governed. So when Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," which is a turning point in human history and governance. It's not a new idea. The Prophet Muhammad said we're all like teeth on a comb. Jesus says you got to go and deal and see the divinity of the least amongst us. So this idea of equality of people wasn't new, but Jefferson articulated as a political tool to break away from the monarchy vision. Now, when he said it, people of color were not included, women were not included, and men without property were not included. But the ought behind it, and obviously it's not self-evident that we're all equal. I mean, some people are smart and some are dumb, some are handsome, some are not, some are tall, some are short. But from a wisdom perspective, we are all equal. And in terms of the preciousness of our lives, they're all equal in the eyes of God and the eyes of wisdom. That ought that Jefferson put into play has been a magnetic and compelling pull for the world ever since. And Gary just takes it and says, well, we need, because he's coming out of the carnage of World War II, we need to see that we need a governance for the whole planet. And that governance has to have legitimacy, and the only legitimacy that it could possibly have has to come from the people. It doesn't come from above. It has to grow organically from the expression of people meeting their needs. And that was his philosophy. And that's sort of the philosophy really behind the United Nations system, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the World Federalists, of which he was very much supportive. But mainly, it is a principle of necessity today on a lot of issues.
And now, Gary, first of all, he and when he leapt up at the United Nations, as you see in our film, The World is My Country, he first called upon the nations to pull together a system of governance for the planet. And then he said, if you won't do it, step aside, and a People's World Assembly will arise from our ranks to do it. And I think he increasingly began to realize, in fact, he put out a paper and so on about this, that to beg and plead the national leaders to create world law is to go against their very reason for being, is their sense of national sovereignty, and they exist because we defend you against the other. And so politicians all over, whenever they start getting in trouble, they point the finger at an enemy, and we got to rouse up and fight that enemy. And then, of course, all the military industries making money on this feed that even more. And we see the nation states divided. We see the very nations, the five that you mentioned were supposed to be the leaders in the world. They're the ones, who won't go along with a nuclear ban, who are blocking preventing nuclear weapons. And so to think that we could get them to just give up their power seems not to be working. We've been trying that for like 70 years with the World Federalists and so on. And Gary said, it's time for us, the people. If we, the people, institute government, it didn't say governments institute government. They didn't ask these other governments to do it. The people have to do it. In fact, he also talks about, even in the Continental Congress, how they dissolved representing their states and reenacted themselves as a committee of the whole and took personal responsibility for creating this new form of governance. So what do you think about Gary's idea that now, he spent the last part of his life, 25 years, working on synergistic systems. He hired Buckminster Fuller, key person, to develop the synergistic system where instead of the win-lose democracy, where one half, 50% win, the other half lose, and where we have such a contentious society, a synergistic system that brings people together in groups like this Zoom and says, well, what is it you really want in life? And what are the things you need? And how do we merge together into a consensus? And I think he felt, and he tested this out with, refugee women in Africa and other places, that when you bring groups together in that way, you can reach a synergy for the planet instead of this divisive world we're facing now. What do you think about, as you talk about experimenting now with how we can use these new tools for the internet, the same ones that could oppress us, to use these tools to begin to create a new, more interactive way that we're directly involved in governing our planet, in answering the Secretary General's call for a global conversation on the future we want. I'm
privileged to have an essay in a book on the subject called The Sovereignty Revolution that is centered around an essay by Senator Alan Cranston, and then the respondents to it are myself, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Jane Goodall. And the way we thought of it is closer to like this. Government is created to express values of people and address issues that need to be addressed. So you have like a local zoning board for the zone, the kind of buildings in your neighborhood. And you have a municipality, a city that deals with city issues. Then you can have a state or a county dealing with larger issues of concern of the citizens. So, and then these various counties can form a state. Like in the United States, you have a zoning area, then a city, then a county, then a state, then the United States. Now, each of these layers of governance addresses different layers of concern. And when the United States was created, and when the modern state was created, we didn't have global existential threats that we have today. In other words, The pandemic, for example, cannot be addressed as at a national level. It's a global phenomenon. The virus doesn't carry a passport. The climate of the planet doesn't recognize national borders. It's a global phenomenon. The third lung that we depend upon, phytoplankton, which is a single cell organism in the oceans, produces 50 to 70% of our oxygen. At least every other breath comes from this third lung that we all share. And that can't be protected. The health of our physical body can't be protected at a national level. And nuclear weapons, which are designed to protect the state, are now threatening the whole. And again, cannot be dealt with at a national level. So in order to deal with these global threats that we face, we require global governance. That doesn't mean you do away with the other layers of governance, that you do away with nations or states or counties or cities or zoning boards. It means that we need the tool to deal with the problems that we face.
Exactly.
And that's called realism. That's realism. What is mythological thinking is the idea that we can have an economic system based on perpetual growth and not on harmony with nature. That's mythical thinking. Exactly. What is mythical thinking is to spend $1.9 trillion on weaponry globally and think that that's going to enhance human security. It won't. That's mythical thinking. So I think that today's situation demands an actual realism. The ecosystem of the planet is one, and the things that bring us together far outweigh the things that separate us. And we need governance institutions that reflect reality and not mythology.
Exactly. Well, that's precisely what Gary felt too, that we need to, like at the World Trade Center, he said, none of the bombs, none of the weapons, none of those could save us. And that the only thing that can save us is by raising our citizenship to the global level. And he always said, citizenship is concentric circles. You know, you're like you said, you're with your zoning board, your school board, your city, your state, your nation, and the world. So he never said that we should eliminate. He didn't say we should eliminate nations. He said that we should create such a global system that they kind of disappear in their importance because we've already got a more interactive system working for us all at a higher level. But he didn't think we should, he said, don't fight against, just like Bucky Fuller, you don't have to fight against the old system. You don't have to get rid of anything. You don't have to, he said, no violence, nothing to overthrow. All we have to do is just get together and create it.
But Arthur, this coordinated system in some sectors of society already exists. I mean, this Zoom we're doing is global, so communication has gone global, right?
Yeah.
And when I was practicing law in a previous lifetime, it seems, if you had a judgment from Canada and you wanted to enforce it in the United States, it was very difficult. A local judge would open up the judgment. Couldn't enforce it. You couldn't enforce a judgment between China and Kazakhstan or between Chile and Malaysia. But today you can. When I practiced, if you wanted to franchise something in the United States, you had to comply with 16 different regimes, 16 different administrative systems. Today you can franchise everywhere in the world almost seamlessly. What happened? How do we have literally trillions of dollars going? How is it now you have the security that a letter of credit in Kuala Lumpur is going to be honored in Santiago, Chile, without any question? How did the business community do this? So what we discover is the commercial community, the businesses, the multinational corporations have figured out a system of global governance that works incredibly efficiently. So the way it works is essentially that in any international trade agreement, there's an arbitration clause. that says if we have a dispute, if we need the administration of justice, the good of justice, to determine disagreements amongst us, we will arbitrate. And I'll pick an arbitrator, my counterpart will pick an arbitrator, they'll pick a third, and we'll create our forum. We'll pick the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, and we will honor that. And that system of arbitration has gone global and has created a global economic order that's fully integrated. This is a reality. This is an aspect of governance. Now, of course, it rests on the ultimate enforcement of states, but Uzbekistan pulled out of it, and within a few months, all of the capital pulled out of the country. So the point that I'm making is that we have the technological, intellectual, and institutional tools to come to higher levels of governance. We have a system of the administration of justice, which is necessary for commerce, working globally, but we don't have a criminal administration of justice. We don't have an environmental administration of justice. We don't have a labor administration of justice. We only have the administration of justice for business. So what's happened is the good of justice has now become a market good. You have to pay for it. It's not being treated as a global common good. But the technical capacity of having governance to facilitate one human endeavor, which is commerce, very important, very valuable. Listen, post-Cold War, literally hundreds of millions of people have been pulled out of gross poverty because of this system. Hundreds of millions of people in Asia and Africa have been pulled out of gross, and Latin America have been pulled out of poverty. On the other hand, it's been unjust in that we've not created commensurate institutions for other human values other than commerce.
Right. We had a fascinating meeting, a series of meetings with Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, the Visa card. And he very much believed in creating what he called a chaotic system, which is an integrated system where everybody's involved. It's kind of like Gary's people-powered planet idea. And he actually started Visa off as a real collaborative thing with different banks and so on, putting aside their individual interests to come together, as you said. And then he very strongly felt we now need to move to a people-powered global governance system. Some very interesting writings on the part of Dee Hock, and we have some very interesting video with him. Well, I noticed we do have quite a few people who want to ask questions, but I do want to ask you a couple more before we turn to questions. If people have questions, they can raise their hand in the participant key or put something in the chat. But I wanted to ask about two different areas. One, Gary in the film talks about the kind of spiritual transformation that happened when he met with the machine shop guru, and at a point when he was at the dark night of his soul, and when he had given up on trying to do anything about creating world citizenship, and of course kind of scoffed at Eleanor Roosevelt's suggestion that he should start a worldwide international government. And then somehow in that depth of working in that machine shop and discovering that Guru Nataraja, something happened to him. What do you think about spiritual power and its role in this transformation of our world?
There's no greater power than the power of awakened conscience. As I pointed out, Thomas Jefferson put into play an articulation of what the conscience tells us, that all lives are all equal. I think that when you look at three core spiritual principles, they apply not only to oneself and one's own health and well-being, they apply universally, because in the way gravity is universal, truth is universal, and there are moral truths and spiritual truths. So I'll lay them out, since it's a serious question, and I'm going to give it a serious answer. Hopefully an answer that will give us more light rather than weight of seriousness. So the first principle is the golden rule. Treat others as one wants to be treated. Refrain from doing to others what you don't want done to yourself. So this principle of ethical harmony amongst people has deep, deep, deep implications because it's founded on the principle that your well-being is dependent on the well-being of others. So just envision a thought experiment for a second. Imagine tomorrow you treat everybody without any reference to their well-being, completely selfishly, and you treat people as means to your most selfish end. And imagine how you would feel when you go to bed afterwards. And then imagine the next day you treat everybody as part of your family with as much love and caring as you possibly can, compassionately feeling their suffering and well-being as part of your own. And then imagine how you feel. Now, clearly, peace of mind comes from application of the golden rule. Now, after World War I, the victors imposed crushing reparations on the German people. The result was the chaos of Nazism. After World War II, the golden rule was applied in the Marshall Plan to the vanquished. And we built up their economies and their political systems as we would want, and ended up with stability and trading partners. Today, the UN system has the Sustainable Development Goals, which are basically the Marshall Plan writ large. So here's a moral ethical principle that applies both to one's own personal growth and globally. The second principle is love people, use things. Don't love things and use people. That's very deep. Ideas are things. They have a beginning and end. But the human being is the embodiment of God, made in the image of God. We're not our bodies leave us, but our souls are infinite. That's what we have to love in each other, and that's what we do love in each other. The light in your eyes is closer to what you are than the skin on your face or the form of your eyes. It's the light in the gem that gives it its values. It's the light of the soul that gives the human being its values. And that's what we have to love. When we love things and use people, misery is the result. And the third principle is one that a great Sufi master, Bawa Muhayyiddin, that I knew very well when he was with us, and he was very, very old, very, very old. He said, separate from yourself that which separates you from others. What separates us? Mind, desire, anger, falsehood, jealousy, miserliness, all the ego mind, egocentric qualities. What brings us together? Love, compassion, patience, justice, peacefulness. And those qualities not only bring us together with one another, they bring us together with the very most important thing to learn in our lives is the luminosity of our souls and its connection to the divine infinite.
Exactly.
And that principle can apply to nations. Nations don't have to dissolve, but they have to address the things that create hostility, divisiveness. So nations can express those profound, beautiful, wondrous human values. The United States has done that. The United States has also done the other. Other countries have done that, and we now have to learn this moment in history. One, we're the first generation that could be the last. We have to decide whether we want to be reasonable, practical, and efficient. And two, we can't be reasonable, practical, and efficient without being fully human. And being fully human means to apply those three ethical principles. One, the golden rule between nations and amongst people. Two, love what's really valuable, which is life itself. And three, practice, analyze, understand oneself. What separates us and what brings us together? And you know what it all comes down to? It all comes down to either love of an illusory self or selfless love. And once a person realizes that love is a dynamic, very powerful force, they realize that's what drives creation. And you know, countries never go to war without invoking love, but it's love of country, love of ethnic identity, love of race, love of religion. We're saying, let's love the reality that the planet Earth is one living whole. The human family is one. And this might be the only place There may be other places where there's life. We don't know. But we know that in this very delicate sphere, where all the dramas of human life take place, where all of our lives take place, is something very precious. And that is our capacity for love. And that's what's at issue today.
That's so crucial and so precious. You know, our planet could very easily, without that thin, fragile layer of atmosphere, we could very much be like Venus with 500-degree surface temperatures and literally hell. And so this is a crucial turning point for humanity, and the decisions we make now will affect those. I know you're a friend of, we're a friend of Robert Mueller's, and I know we have Barbara Mueller with us today on the podcast, his widow, and she, he said something very powerful that touched me, and he said, there's a new superpower, and that new superpower is we the people. How can we unleash that superpower to save humanity at this crucial moment? I mean, in our film, you saw where I asked Leonardo DiCaprio, in the movies, always at the last minute when things look dismal, a hero saves us. Who's the hero who's going to save us? And he said, it's all of us. How do we become that hero? How do we take that individual heroism and implement it into creating world law? How can this new superpower create a regime of world law that could literally save us from extinction?
Well, first, I don't think there's any reductionist answer to your question. And it would be wrong. I mean, I think it is applying those three practical ethical principles at all levels of society. The question you've asked is a question of process. And the current political institutions we have are being driven by local, very myopic concerns. And the challenges we have are global in nature. So there's an emerging global conscience demanding greater global cooperation to address these issues. So I don't know if you're asking like a how question or a why question. In other words, and when you say, what can we do? Well, there's something that Bill Gates can do that I can't do. And there's things that I can do that Bill Gates can't do. So when you say we, I think that that's a much larger discussion of how do we create social structures that are politically relevant. So for example, one of the things that I am very involved in is Parliamentarians for Nuclear Nonproliferation and Disarmament. So because of the skills and proclivities I have, I've helped create an organization with a very dynamic international leader, Alan Ware. He's been the main operative person of parliamentarians around the world to communicate their global concerns. They're mainly concerned with nuclear weapons, but the same people concerned with nuclear weapons get it, because nobody votes them into office on nuclear weapons issues. They understand the environmental issues. They understand the importance of gender equity. They understand the importance of caring for one another rather than just for greed and business. So at levels of parliament, we have to create. When I was a lawyer during the Cold War, I helped bring lawyers from the then Soviet Union to the United States and showed them how we actually have courts with juries, how we actually treat the rule of law very seriously. Of course, this current administration is an abomination in which the rule of law is really put at risk. But this is part of the American tradition. So we created professional organizations that are international and go beyond boundaries. You're a participant in the Rotary Club. The Rotary Club viewed polio and smallpox as neighborhood issues, worked on it. So, I mean, I think, let me just give something that people can do now, that everyone can do. Everyone can do. Since you said we, I think you meant everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So here's something everyone can do, especially in democracies. We can demand that our political representatives, at whatever level, answer three questions. One, what are you doing to end poverty? Because we have the ability to end poverty now. It's an issue of the application of justice. Two, what are you doing to protect the climate? Well, the reason the climate's at risk is because of the economic system we have, because of how we fuel it, which is a political issue. And 3, what are you doing to get rid of nuclear weapons, which go to the very distorted definition of how we pursue security. And 4, ask themselves, how am I bringing the highest love that I know within myself into action? So I think people are reluctant to engage in these large global issues, largely because they don't feel competent. And you know what? We're not. None of us are. We all have to come together and debate and discuss and have different points of view and respect one another. But we can ask our political representatives, what are you doing to address these issues? And if there's candidates who you know don't care about these issues, don't vote for them. They have to care. But I think we need to be asking our congressional representatives, our mayors, and certainly higher office. And then I also think that people need to, in the same way as they need to understand the civics of how their nation works, we need to bring civics education back into our schools. This has been taken out. It's horrible. We need global civics education. Robert Mueller has a curriculum at his website of civics education for the globe. People need to know, how does the ecosystem of the planet work? Where does our oxygen come from? How important is the topsoil? How much water is there? Where does water come from? Does water like pour in from heaven? Or are we drinking the same water that Jesus and Muhammad drank? Water is water. Liquid is liquid. We're all sharing the liquid. We drink it and it becomes piss, and then it's the ocean, and it goes through a process and we drink it again. It's the same water that was here it's the same water that the pharaohs drank. It's the same water that Julius Caesar drank. It's just one water. It's one air. People don't know basically even where their air comes from. And they know nothing about the global financial system. Right. So we need a massive education system that addresses how things really are. That's really important, is education. Right. Because you cannot have democratic process, people expressing their values, if they're operating based on mythology. They have to
absolutely know.
First place that I've seen actual, really a robust curriculum is at Robert Mueller's. Now there's global there's organizations of global education, but I like Robert Mueller's curriculum, and it's all in one place.
Beautiful. Well, we'll maybe if Barbara's on, she can put that in the chat box where we go for that.
There's no simple answer to your question. It's a process of education and engagement.
And I think one of the things that Gary, of course, was saying is also feeling empowered ourselves. That it's not just asking leaders within the current system, but really taking seriously our responsibility to institute governance at the global level. But that could be a whole other discussion. And I see we have lots of questions from the audience. So let me turn it over to Melanie, who is going to field questions from the audience. I'm glad you mentioned Rotary. Quite a few people are Rotarians as well. Let's turn to questions now, Melanie.
Great. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Melanie.
Hey. Jonathan, so interesting. You're so educated, and we are learning so much, and appreciate you. We have questions. We're going to fit them all in, but we'll go over a little bit. So Anne Frisch, if you could go first, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think I met you at the United Nations and PT meetings in 2019. I think I handed you a pitch to join Rotary and even got quite specific about it, but I haven't heard your answer yet. But in any case, what about this concept of world citizen in terms of the NPT meetings? We have country delegates who represent their countries. We have NGO, civil society observers who can't talk, but they can be there. What about the concept of having individual world citizens in that meeting with more connections? Because from my perspective, I only met one delegate Most of them were in the delegates lounge where I was not allowed to be. So how could we, in that meeting that's still coming up, the Review 2020, can you visualize having world citizens involved in that to, I guess you could say, to, if as world citizens, we really want nuclear disarmament, I think we're probably agreed we do not want a nuclear war or conflagration. How would you structure this? We have an NGO participation, and presumably there could be individual participation of people coming as world citizens. That's the question I need an answer to.
I mean, citizenship is a creation of political institutions. Citizenship is an artifice.
Right.
We're not born as citizens. We're born as human beings. We're born as global citizens in the sense that you're talking about. We're not born with citizenship identity. So to have a citizenship concept, you need to have a political organization bestowing that identity. So the question is, the UN is the only institution that could do that. But the UN is founded by the member states, although their first paragraph, the peoples of the, it's literally grounded in the legitimacy of the peoples. But structurally, it is controlled by the member states. So you would have to create a political coalition of nations to create some form of identity, some way in which the UN would, or some other body would grant you a citizenship status, if you're talking about actual citizenship. I mean, there is a thing, planet citizen and all this stuff, but these are just cultural identities. You're talking about actual political identity, correct?
I guess so.
I mean,
I'm for how do we get ordinary people coming in with a worldview to interact with the delegates and convey.
I think that would be very distracting. I mean, the delegates are diplomats. If you want to get rid of nuclear weapons, the question is, how do we get the diplomats to be more important than the military leaders? Because the diplomats laid out a disarmament agenda in the NPT in 1995 and 2000. The 13 practical steps of the 2000 NPT review, and then the over 60 practical steps laid out in the 2010 review conference is the pathway to nuclear disarmament. And the nuclear weapon states committed to those steps, but they haven't lived up to it because the people at a national level are not saying to their governments, live up to your promises.
Well, maybe distraction would be a good idea.
Pardon me?
Maybe distraction would be a good idea. You said it would be very distracting to have people there as individuals, and interacting with delegates would be very distracting. But
it would be. They wouldn't be able to do their work. And the work that the diplomats have done is absolutely excellent. The problem is that domestically their governments are not living up to the commitments the diplomats have made on behalf of governments, because the governments are dominated by the military definition of security. We need to redefine security based on human security. Security is look. If you understand the budget of the state is its skeleton. So what is the budget of the United States for global human security? It's minuscule. The budget for military security of hundreds of military bases around the world is literally in the hundreds of billions of dollars. What is the budget of human security of any major state? It's minimal. There's no funding for the Sustainable Development Goals, which the diplomats have negotiated. But they come back domestically, and our domestic systems are about taxes and sex and identity, and can you carry a handgun, what's your schools like. People don't vote on the realistic issues that they're facing. And so we squander huge amounts of money on a misdefinition of security. We need to shift the definition of security from militarism and nationalism to human security. That would free up the resources to fulfill the commitments that have already been made in the NPT. The diplomats have done a great job, but their national governments have not lived up to them.
Thank you, Jonathan. I guess I'll interject. So we want to get a few more people, if that's okay, Anne. We have Barbara Gone-Mueller, and I just want to give her the floor just real quick. Barbara, if you can go ahead. She would like to share something on her screen and also talk a little bit. So Barbara, go right ahead.
I'm only going to take a minute, but my heart goes out to you, Jonathan. You are just as dynamic as you were 20 years ago. Keep it up. Your answers are even more succinct and more perfect, and we understand them instantly. But I wanted to show you all, and I hope you can see this. This is the World Core Curriculum. It is in volume 1 of Robert's Ideas, and it goes from the infinitely small to the gigantic universe, and it begins before birth. It begins in the womb of the mother who is laying in front of these beautiful holograms of the universe, and she's talking to her unborn child and saying, you are going to be born into the universe, into a world that's going to work for all, and it begins with my love for you. And I wanted to ask and say one thing to Jonathan. Jonathan, you hit the nail on the head when you said love. How did we end the Civil War? When Freud asked, I can't remember who it was. It'll come to me. He said, what are we going to do to save our world? He said, well, do you know how they ended the Civil War? They ended it by loving the United States. So we have to have a big love fest of loving our earth, so we save our earth. So anyway, that's it. I have another Canadian Zoom call coming in. Lots of love.
Okay, Jared Kettleman, you have the floor.
I have a question for you. I think we're all part of this big movement. We'd like to break out into the mainstream, meaning we're not part of the political debate. I don't hear anybody out there at these presidential elections debating about world government or bringing civilization to the global level or abolishing nuclear weapons or any of these issues, really. And I'd like to ask you, the question is, how can we become part of the mainstream political debate? What do you see as pathways to getting our message out there?
Well, those are two questions. One is getting our message out there, and the other is being part of the mainstream political debate. To become part of the mainstream political debate, you have to get involved in a political party. You've got to get involved in starting your ward leaders and then your local government, and then you've got to put the time in the political process. And one of the terrible things that's happened in the United States, which I know very well, is that people progressive have largely pulled out of the political parties, and that's wrong. And we've allowed the idea that we could, by culture, change political institutions. Can't happen. We won the culture war of the 60s. We changed the way people dress and behave and care and spirituality and diet and all of those things. Music and culture. We won. But we didn't win on economics or politics because we pulled out of it. So people have to re-engage in the political institutions. Now, I think that there's avenues, because you're talking about the expression of conscience. I think we have to go into the mainstream religious institutions and demand that like Catholics, priests live up to the Pope's admonitions. The Pope's Laudato Si is the best document we have on environmental responsibility. Talk to any local priest; he'll tell you about why abortion's bad. And completely neglect the Pope's entire teaching on the environment, or the Pope's position on nuclear disarmament. The Pope is an advocate not only of fulfilling the NPT, but it has condemned the very possession of nuclear weapons as immoral. How many priests know about that? Or the position of the National Council of Churches, which is calling for abolition. I think that there's a real fertile ground in the moral institutions of our country. Well, I have an idea that I'd like to put out. I think we need a responsible investment initiative. We have divestment initiatives in our major colleges now on climate, but that's very naive, because if you don't address geopolitics, you can't address climate. So the investment guidelines for the Norwegian pension fund, which is a pension fund for future generations arising from the windfall of money they got from the oil in the North Sea. Their parliament said, if we keep depending on fossil fuel, then this fund there's not going to be a planet for future generations. So let's have guidelines on sustainability of the investment. So the fund cannot invest in enterprises that grossly violate human rights, such as child labor, etc. It cannot invest in companies that pollute the environment, and cannot invest in companies that benefit from weapons of indiscriminate effect, landmines, cluster munitions, and nuclear weapons. That fund has outperformed the market for decades. It is literally in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It far exceeds any market funds. It's one of the best. It doesn't far exceed any market funds, but it's one of the best. But what we don't have is a responsible investment movement in our churches and in our universities. They're siloed. They don't bring together the natural allies of human rights, environment, and disarmament. Those are natural allies. That's how a movement begins, when you see principles that bring together massive numbers of people. So that's something I think would be very valuable. Not just having divestment from fossil fuel, but responsible investment that brings together these movements. And that could be done at college campuses and churches right away. And that would help create that dynamic you're talking about, I believe.
Thank you, Jerry. And next we have Richard Denton. Richard, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you, Jonathan, for this excellent talk.
Your study is so cool. With all the boats back there.
Well, I come from Nova Scotia, so.
Where Pugwash is.
Correct.
Okay, well, we got to talk about Pugwash. Okay, I got it. All right, I'm with you.
I'm a member of Pugwash as well, so.
Fabulous.
And visited the little community of Pugwash. But my question to you is, we talk about the third UN, the first being the delegates, the second being the bureaucrats, the third being the NGOs. What role is there for Rotary as an NGO in the UN and in getting rid of nuclear weapons?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. First, Rotary's motto is service above self. And based on that, Rotary was absolutely instrumental in addressing the scourges of both polio and smallpox, working at a transnational level with programs at local level and at national levels, and with the World Health Organization, based on that commitment. And Rotary is an example of success in taking that on. If Rotary took on the moral imperative of the elimination of nuclear weapons, and every local Rotary took that on with the same sense of moral commitment that they did in addressing disease, they could make a difference faster than any other civil society organization. I remember I spoke at the Rotary in San Francisco 3 years ago, and they put it out, and they had 53 consulates showed up. They'd never had that before, and the theme was Rotary and the abolition of nuclear weapons, and it resonated. I just don't have it. Disarmament is very difficult to fund, and in the last decade, we've just been bankrupted, those of us working in this field, largely because of the professionalism that's entered into the funding of are foundations, where they want management by objective. You can't measure the kind of thing we're doing. So they fund projects. But Rotary is capable of taking on a global project because it has the infrastructure that doesn't need to be funded. It can just be commitments. So I think that Rotary, if your Rotary chapter took it on to bring it to the forefront of the International Rotary Convention and you could start with Canada, and you could have Doug Roach address them, or Romeo Dallaire, or Kim Campbell. These are three people I brought to Toronto to the Parliament of the World Religions, and every one of them, any one of those three, could be persuasive to the Rotary. Then there's other people like myself, and there's lots of people that could put it before them that this is consistent with their values, and this would be a huge contribution. And they don't have to have the expertise of it. What they need to do, and this goes to the first question, is to get the nations of the world to fulfill the commitments they've already made under the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. The diplomats have laid out the roadmap. The roadmap is not, the Prohibition Treaty is terrific. Calling for a mononuclear weapons convention is terrific. But there's things that we can do now that are real steps that lead that way, that the nations of the world have committed to. But we haven't created the domestic pressure to do it. DFATE within the Department of Foreign Affairs of Canada used to be instrumental in bringing middle power countries together. I was one of the founders of the Middle Powers Initiative, which was really founded by Senator Douglas Roach of Canada. And this was bringing middle power countries together to be a bridge between the non-aligned and the nuclear weapon states to come up with practical steps to move forward. And Canada played a huge role in that. Pugwash Canada has got to get in front of Trudeau. Now, to its credit, it now has a very good ambassador at the UN, Ambassador Ray. So there's real hope for Canada, and Canada has that legacy of people should know. Pugwash conferences brought together scientists from the Soviet Union and the West at the height of the Cold War, and they met in this village in Nova Scotia called Pugwash that Cyrus Eaton owned, this beautiful little retreat. We had Middle Power Initiative retreats there. That's how I know, because I was there. And those scientists helped save the world. They really did. And Pugwash won the Nobel Prize for this work. Out of that came the Pugwash Scientist Organization, which calls on scientists to take the Hippocratic Oath of doing no harm. And they won the Nobel Prize in 1995. So anyway, I think that Rotary could take on the issue of the moral imperative of the abolition of nuclear weapons. And I personally would be, I could be very helpful in that. The Rotary section at the UN has had some meetings about it, but we haven't, and the Rotary of San Francisco has had some meetings about it, but there hasn't been a commitment at the international level to make this, and there hasn't been a challenge. So I think that we need to create a challenge.
Yes, Rotary. Yes, we need a challenge, and yes, Rotary, you're amazing. You can do it. Thank you, Richard. Okay, Joseph Ronca is our very last question. Thank you all for staying so late. Joseph, if you could go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. You could hear me, okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, as some of you know, the United States is going before the Human Rights Council on November 9th. This is the part of the what's called Universal Periodic Review. Every 4 years, a country goes before the UN Human Rights Council. I'm wondering, Jonathan, and thanks for your inspiring words, incidentally, what 3 questions you might pose to the United States in order of priority concerning their human rights violations in this country and what they're going to do about it.
How dare you put the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court on your sanctions list? How dare you undermine the principle of the rule of law? How dare you enable the President of the United States to undermine democracy and voting? Shame on you. When will you be America again?
Wow.
Thank
Wow.
Thank Well said.
Yeah, and thank you, Joseph, and thank you all. And I'll pass this back to Arthur. Arthur, oh, before, Jonathan, again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wow.
Back to Arthur.
Well, what a wonderful presentation, and so many great ideas from the power of responsible investing, if we could mobilize these huge funds in that direction, to the power of mobilizing the power of Rotary to come together on this, and so many great thoughts. I can see why you actually were yourself a Nobel Prize nominee. So I just want to thank you so much, Jonathan, for being with us, and just give you my heartfelt appreciation and thanks. And also to tell everybody a little bit more about signing up for our podcast and what's coming next. If you just go to peoplepoweredplanet.com, that's a shortcut to take you to theworldismycountry.com/club. And if you scroll down, you can either sign up free, or you can join us with a contribution that'll also help us carry on this important work. And you can also especially help us now, because we've mentioned Gary's film a number of times. We have a very exciting development, and that is that NETA, which is one of the 3 suppliers of public broadcasting programming, is going to be sending our film out to all the public broadcasting stations in the country. We believe that's going to be for December 10th, the anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights, but we're not sure yet how the scheduling is going to work. We'll see how that goes. But this is a marvelous opportunity, and they've also offered us a chance to get underwriters. When we put this out on the air, you know, on PBS, they say the following program is brought to you by the such and such foundation and this company bringing good things to life, or whatever else. So people will have a chance. Hopefully many Rotarians will help, buy some of those underwriting spots to help us get this important message out to the world widely. So next week on the People Powered Planet podcast, rather than have a Pacific speaker, we're going to actually be talking about this marvelous opportunity to get this film out across the country and how you can be a part of it. And we're going to be looking for your suggestions and ideas. It's going to kind of be an organizing meeting to get ready for that public broadcasting program of The World is My Country out to the world. And if you haven't seen it yet, just during this COVID crisis, we've made it temporarily free, a shorter version. And you can go to theworldismycountry.com, click through the links, and sign up with your email address, and you'll get to watch that free right on YouTube. So take a look at that, tell your friends about it, and join us next week. And then we continue to have great speakers after that. You'll find out when you look at the club, some of the wonderful people lined up following that, including former military officers and other key people who are helping us now come together to develop what Gary called the people-powered planet.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.